Hello, everybody. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Ryan, and I'm going to be talking about Nintendo history today. I'm going to go from the beginning all the way to the present right now, and the present right now is 2019. So let's get started. Nintendo was a company founded in 1889, September 23rd, by a man named Fusahiro Yamauchi. The company started out as a playing card company that made Hanafuda cards, a very popular game in Japan back pre-World War II. Little did Yamauchi know, though, that Nintendo would take on a grand road in more recent years. However, Nintendo spent a lot of time in its early stages spending money on different assets such as like love hotels, taxi services, but those business ventures didn't go anywhere in the end. Sticking to selling cards and toys is actually what kept Nintendo afloat through the early 1900s. That is until they began their venture into video games. They started off by selling the Odyssey console. Very simple, like pre-Atari, so like it wasn't even that complex, really, really simple games. It sparked a fire in Nintendo, though, to make their own console. And their first console for the home was the Color TV game. It allowed people to play 6 colored variations of basically Pong, but instead of just Pong, you could move the 2 bars like around the entire screen however you wanted. It was around the 1970s, mid 1970s, that Shigeru Miyamoto was hired by Nintendo as a product developer. Mr. Shigeru Miyamoto. We'll get onto him in just a sec. But also in mid-1970s, Nintendo had decided to move over into the arcade cabinet business with their first arcade game called EVR Race. It was designed by their first game designer, Mr. Genyo Takeda. The arcade game was received pretty alright with the public, but it was the release of Donkey Kong, made by Shigeru Miyamoto, in 1981 that would be Nintendo's saving grace. Donkey Kong, obviously, like I said, was made by Miyamoto, and actually was intended to be a Popeye game, but they couldn't get the licensing from Disney, so it was scratched. So instead, Miyamoto came up with Jumpman, or as us Americans know him, Mario. Then in 1979, one of their developers, Gunpei Yokoi, came up with the idea to make like handheld video games called Game & Watches from watching a dude on the bullet train play with an LCD calculator. It's actually pretty cool. It led to the invention, like I said, went to the invention of the Game & Watch. It was a handheld gaming device. Basically, any of those, like if you ever went to McDonald's and you got a toy that just had like the 2 buttons and it had multiple like black figures on the screen, and those would like light up and move. That's what the Game & Watch was. That was like where all of those little toys started from. The first Game & Watch game had a simple title called Ball, where a little man juggles and you have to move him left and right to keep the balls in the air. The crosspad button that you see on all handheld Nintendo consoles was actually invented by Yokoi as well, and it was used for a Donkey Kong version of the Game & Watch in 1982. Obviously, it was a big success, just as big as, Donkey Kong. Soon after, in 1983, Nintendo launched something called the Famicom, which is short for Family Computer. Basically, it was the Nintendo Entertainment System, but Japanese version. It looked a little more chrome. It was orange and like red, and it had like just a more chrome look to it. Obviously, when they invented it, they put like their most popular arcade cabinet games onto cartridges, so that kids could play them at home if you bought them. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Then around 1985, they reworked the design of the Famicom for marketing purposes. They didn't want the Famicom to look like a toy, because they didn't want the Famicom to look like a gaming system. They wanted it to look more like a toy, because at the time, early 80s, there was a really heavy video game crash. It wasn't doing so well. So they created the Nintendo Entertainment System out of the Famicom, and they made sure to call it the Entertainment System instead of like gaming. You know, they didn't want to say anything like gaming wise. The redesign obviously was sold to North America. The redesigned console was sold to North America, and because of game bundling, Super Mario Bros. Was like the top-selling game at the time. Because they had like a bundle. Like when you game bundle, that's basically you're selling the console with a game pre-packaged. So like you get a free game with the console pretty much. In like 1980, so Super Mario Bros. Came out like with the selling. Like, with the release of the Famicom, you had Super Mario Bros. Because, you know, Miyamoto wanted the man in red to have his own video game. Miyamoto actually used Mario in a lot of different video games because his design was so simple. So, like, you can see him in Punch-Out. He's like a referee a lot in different games. The very first Legend of Zelda game was actually created in 1986, also by Miyamoto. The green-clad hero Link was based off of Miyamoto himself, actually. Miyamoto, like, drew from his childhood experiences when he would explore around and find caves when he was a kid. It's pretty awesome. Not only that, but the first female protagonist, Samus from Metroid, not only that, but the first female protagonist, Samus Aran, was featured in Metroid. It was actually pretty mind-blowing to a lot of people that you'd been playing a female character the entire time, but you didn't realize it until the end. You're just like, you're playing this badass bounty hunter that got rockets for hands, shooting out lasers, does a, like, screw attack. That's one of Samus' signature moves. And then in the end, you know, she just takes off her helmet and like the top of her suit. You can just see that she's wearing basically it looks like she's wearing a bikini. So it's like, whoa, didn't know I was playing a girl the whole time. This game was designed by Gunpei Yokoi instead of Miyamoto. And then 2 years later, Yokoi struck genius once again and created the Game Boy. He decided to combine the portability of the Game & Watch and the cartridges of the NES. And the Game Boy, like, blew expectations for sure. It was released in 1989 in Japan and, like, a couple months later in North America. With the bundling, of course, for the selling of this game, a third-party game, Tetris, everybody who doesn't know Tetris, that was the Game Boy's best game. Huge success. The console also led to the birth of the Game Boy also led to the birth of everybody's favorite pink puffball, Kirby, who was created by Masahiro Sakurai. Kirby's Dream Land was the first game Kirby was released on for the Game Boy in 1992. By 1990, Nintendo had decided it was time for, you know, bigger and better things, so they released the Super Famicom, which had far greater graphical and audio capabilities over the original. Like, basically the main thing at this time was it had more bits, because Nintendo Entertainment, the NES, like, only ran on 8 bits. I can only process, like, It's really weird. It can only process 8 ones and zeros for every pixel. So now with the 16-bit, it can handle more and like it can process more information and give you better graphics. It was also redesigned because it still looked orange and chrome for Japan, so it was redesigned again for into the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and was sold in North America. People usually call it the SNES or Super Nintendo. Nobody has time for the whole Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And of course, Nintendo's biggest competitor at the time was Sega, who sold the Sega Genesis in America. And Sega Genesis had 16 bits, so this started a little, like, war, especially since Sega's slogan at the time was "Sega does what Nintendo don't." So during the console wars, Nintendo and Sega were just trying to keep up with each other in like the video game market, pretty much. One of the things Nintendo did to keep up was they started opening up World of Nintendo stores all around America. These people could go to these stores and test out and buy like different Nintendo products. This is pretty cool. Not too long after, in 1993, Nintendo had announced that their newest project that would feature 16-bit graphics. Nintendo announced their newest project that would feature like 16-bit graphics. So now it got like even crazier because now with 64 bits, you could go into third dimension, like with the video games. So, and they were able to do this with like a North American tech company called Silicon Graphics. They called the project Project Reality. It was also around this time that Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, featuring Fox McCloud, was introduced to the Super Nintendo. It was able to feature 3D graphics on the SNES because of Argonaut Games developing a Super FX hardware add-on that you could put as a chip that you could put into your Super Nintendo, and it would allow it to play Star Fox, which is the beginning of what Project Reality's like 3D graphics were gonna run on. So they figured they were going to originally do an add-on to the Super Nintendo, but then they decided, let's make an entirely different console. More consoles at the time, like the original PlayStation and Sega CD, were using Laserdisc tech to store their games, but Nintendo still kept on with the cartridges. They totally believed in the cartridges. They even said like 1994 is the year of the cartridge after announcing that they sold like 1 billion cartridges, which 10% of them were all from the Mario series. So like millions and millions of copies. They also at the time announced their newest console, now called the Ultra 64, would continue to feature cartridges as well. So they weren't going to switch over to CD. Then a company called Rare was hired by Nintendo to develop these new 3D games. Really impressed Nintendo. They really took off with the engine that the 3D gaming format ran on, and they just were flying with progress. So Nintendo liked them so much that they bought a fourth of the company. So they allowed Rare to use like lots of different Nintendo characters. This turned Rare into Nintendo's first second-party developer, and the first game that they created as a team was Donkey Kong Country. It's a platform it was a super popular game. Like if you knew Super Nintendo, you knew Donkey Kong Country for sure. It was a platformer, a lot like Mario, but you were playing as Donkey Kong. You're fighting the Crocs, and super fun. Really, really hard game too. Definitely a big challenge. It was released on the Super Nintendo as well. It did feature 3D graphics using the Super FX, just like Star Fox. Then during the N64's development, Nintendo, being the big innovator that it is, tried their hand, amazingly enough, at virtual reality way before we even got something good. It was designed by Mr. Yokoi as well. It was basically a pair of large binoculars standing on two short, stubby legs. So if you put it on a tabletop, you could place your face against it. And then you had a controller attached with a wire to the back of the console. So you basically would put your face up against it, and it had two screens for each eye, and it had red chromatic graphics. It just really didn't actually. It did horribly. Nobody liked the Virtual Boy. It was kind of a failure. With the failure, it was discontinued. And Gunpei Yokoi totally retired after that. He was really bummed. that his hand at virtual reality wasn't as good as he thought it would be. The same year, Nintendo developed a Japan-only add-on to the Super Famicom called the Satellaview. It was some radio edition that you could like have with subscriptions. You could listen to music. You had games that would come in. You get sent games that were exclusive to the Satellaview. It was really weird. It only lasted in popularity to like 2001. So going back to 1996, though, it was a really big year for Nintendo as they finally released the Nintendo 64, and was also the same year Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue were released for the Game Boy. And we all know how big Pokemon is. It was made by Satoshi Tajiri, right? It was created by Satoshi Tajiri, and was based off his childhood hobby of collecting and trading insects with his friends. The game was also perfect for utilizing the Game Boy's link cables, so people could like trade and battle with their Pokemon, just like he did with his friends. Now back to the N64. It was focusing more on innovation rather than amazing graphics. If you take a look at Mario 64, doesn't look the best, but that game plays so amazingly that like still some people would call like Mario 64 and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time the best games of all time. Like still people would call it that. So that's really impressive. The N64 also birthed one of the most awesome concepts for video games at the time, which was Super Smash Bros. And was a crossover fighting game. It's a crossover fighting game that allows you to it was a crossover fighting game that featured Nintendo's biggest PRs duking it out in combat. The game was created by Masahiro Sakurai himself, and involved hitting players to raise their damage percent, knocking them off stage, instead of the more traditional health bar, trying to deplete your character's health. The game had only 12 characters, but as I just said, it was Nintendo's biggest PRs, so it had Mario, Luigi, DK, Link, Pikachu, Jigglypuff, Fox, Samus, Yoshi, Captain Falcon, and Ness. Those were the big 12, Nintendo's most popular characters at the time. It was released in 1999, which is actually my birthday. Is pretty funny. Moving back a year, though, in 1998, it was the release of the Game Boy's successor, which was the Game Boy Color. Since the original game only had like two colors, which was white and black, more green and black though, because the screen was green, and just with black pixels laid over it. The Game Boy Color featured better graphics, better audio, and of course more colors than the original. Moving forward a couple years, though, we finally hit the 2000s when Nintendo would introduce the Game Boy Advance and the GameCube. The GameCube was a fantastic console, but unfortunately failed to meet projections due to a lack in like marketing, and just it didn't sell very well in Japan, and it didn't not many copies were sold in North America. But it was still a good console nonetheless. Had a very good processor, like all the games on it look pretty amazing. The best-selling game on the GameCube was Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is the second game in the Smash Bros. Series, and it's still like it's still one of the most popular Smash games. Like the competitive scene is absolutely crazy. Then the Game Boy Advance got another upgrade in 2003, becoming the Game Boy Advanced SP, which received positive reviews for its like portable clamshell design. You could fold it because it had like its screen was basically, it was a cube, and you like flipped open the top screen, and you could like fit it in your pocket. Its best-selling game was Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which again, Pokemon is super popular for portable. Like any portable console for Nintendo is gonna have like Pokemon right up there with the best sellers. It was during this time in 2002 that Satoru Iwata was ushered in as Nintendo's newest president, the first president to be non-related by blood or marriage or anything to the previous president. First time in Nintendo's history that ever happened. Moving into 2004, Nintendo released its newest innovative console, the Nintendo DS, DS standing for dual screen. It had two screens on the top and bottom. The top screen, it obviously, like the Game Boy Advance SP, it flipped open, so you had, that's how you had the two screens. It flipped open, so that's how you had the two screens. The bottom one was able to respond to touch of a stylus provided to you with the game, or provided to you with the console, or you could just touch it with your finger, and it would, like, the games you're playing would respond, depending on whether or not it needed a stylus. The DS's mission for Nintendo was to get it out of the depression that the GameCube had created because of how poorly it sold, which it did a bang-up job for sure. I mean, which the DS did an amazing job doing. It totally, like, blew expectations. Then in early 2006, the DS received an upgrade and a sleeker look. They called it the Nintendo DS Lite, and was received with open arms by the public. This console, like, helped lay the groundwork for Nintendo's next big console that would use Wi-Fi, because this, what this little thing featured is that it had a little bit of wireless connection between different consoles. Later in the later half of the year, Nintendo released the Wii, which was another innovative console that was backward compatible with, like, old GameCube games. The Wii sold over, like, 100 million copies worldwide and was the best seller of its generation of consoles. So take that, Xbox and PlayStation. Accompanying the Wii is the highest selling game available for a single console, which was Wii Sports. Wii Sports is the highest selling game, like, available for a single console, like, of all time. So basically meaning, like, it's not available for any other console, and any game that's only available for its own console, it sold the best, like, out of all games of all time. The Wii was most notable for its innovative Wii remotes that had wireless laser point technology. You had a little sensor bar that would detect the movement of the Wii remote, and then the Wiimote Plus came out, which basically could track a movement on its own by shaking the Wii remote. The Wii remote was affectionately called the Wiimote by fans because, you know, remote, Wiimote. Without the Wii, Nintendo definitely would have, like, it would not have been as big as it is today. Like, the Wii was just a really fun console to play with, and it had so much variety. You could make Miis of yourself, like, you had a little game where you could make characters of yourself. You could go online to purchase games, like old games, the N64, SNES, or you could buy, like, new games too. Really, like, the Wii was just the definition of innovative. Like, it was awesome. Then cut to 2008 when the next DS, the DSi, was born. Again, the DS received, like, basic upgrades as, like, prolonged battery life, more powerful RAM and CPU. It also had, like, two cameras added, one facing forward and one facing towards you. The console, like the Wii, also had an online store which allowed you to, like, purchase micro games or full games. It was released worldwide a year later in 2009, and soon after, literally, like, less than half a year after, they came out with the DSi XL, which is basically a bigger, better version. Couldn't fit in your, like, it would still fit in your pocket, but you definitely, like, needed a big pocket. Let's cut again to 2011, when the most recent member of the DS family line was released, called the 3DS. It contained a glasses-free stereo top. It had, like, a 3D slider on the side of the console, so, like, you could adjust the feeling of depth of how it looked, like, with the slider. So the more you raised it, the more it felt like the screen was going deeper in, and that you had, like, a 3D feel. The best-selling game for the 3D part of the 3D aspect of the game wasn't really what, like, sold it. It was more the video games itself, because the 3D didn't, like, really appeal to kids. If anything, it, like, hurt your eyes if you stared at it for too long. but the games were so much fun that nobody really cared, you know. The best game being Mario Kart 7, because again, Mario Kart, like, how could you not want to play like right next to your buddy? Then the next home console came along in the form of the Wii U, basically an upgrade to the Wii. The main feature of the Wii U was that you have the main console, which is like the Wii, that you put the discs in, and then you had the gamepad with a screen that was connected to it. The gamepad was basically it. So if you're playing alone, a person could still use the TV, and you could play whatever Wii U game you're playing on your gamepad. Or if you were playing like with multiplayer, you had like multiplayer games where you, as the single player, had a different perspective than your other friends, so you could like make plenty of different games based off that. That you could like. There was like this one Nintendo. It's basically called Nintendo Land, that basically used that as its main gimmick, and every game that you had was like multiplayer, and the person who had the gamepad was given a different perspective to either like play against or work together with like your opponents or like your people you're playing with. The library of the Wii U may be pretty low, but it still worked with Wii games too, so it still sold pretty good. Unfortunately, it didn't sell anywhere near as good as the Wii, but it still did pretty good for what it was. Its best-selling game was Mario Kart 8, because people just love racing. They just love racing. Nintendo released the 2DS in 2013 because they felt like, you know, the DS might be getting a little too pricey, and they also, you know, were receiving reviews that like nobody really cared about the 3D part of the 3DS. So basically the 2DS was a flat, sleek, like more like just a sleeker model. It was flat. It actually didn't fold, so they took out the folding design, but it still had the two screens. But it was more portable, more affordable, so that's what they went with this time around. Then in 2015, President Satoru Iwata had passed away from cancer, unfortunately, and the mantle was passed on to Tatsumi Kimishima after the company was being taken care of for a few months by Miyamoto and Takeda. Also in 2015, Nintendo announced that they'd be trying their hand at mobile games, with their first of the lineup being something called Miitomo, which is basically like Tamagotchi, but you had your Mii, and you could take them around and do different stuff in like this big old building. This is kind of fun. Then on the same day, Reggie, former president of Nintendo of America, had announced the next home console, the Project NX. Everybody was super excited for the NX. Like, there were so many rumors going around that it was going to be like a portable like nobody could figure out at the time whether it was going to be portable or whether it was going to be a home console. Turns out it ended up being both, but it turns out it actually ended up being both, but we'll get more to that, more on that later. It was stated by Nintendo that this next console would not succeed the 3DS nor the Wii U, but become something of its own. On July of 2016, Nintendo brought back the NES in the form of the NES Classic, featuring 30 of the most popular games from the NES. Then in July of 2016, Nintendo released one of the most popular mobile games pretty much ever at the time of release, was Pokemon Go, which was a gigantic success for Nintendo and great, like, it increased their net income like over 100 times what it was going to be that year. It's pretty crazy. Then they released Super Mario Run in December, which was basically an intention of like pulling mobile game users in like into the Nintendo world with a simple Mario game, because that game only ran on like two functions, like tap and hold, and you would hold it down to make Mario run, and you'd tap it to make him jump. So like you couldn't get more simple than that. Then before, however, in October, Nintendo finally announced the next game console, which would be called the Switch. That was the NX. Again, proving just how innovative Nintendo can be, the console transcended anything Nintendo had ever done before. It It was a console that can be played at home on TV, placed on the tabletop, or you could bring it with you on the go. The Switch was released in March of 2017 and had a pretty mixed reviews in the beginning, but thus far, with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Mario Odyssey, all these big titles have really just been doing the Switch wonders. The Switch also was the time that Nintendo decided to to work with third-party developers, indie game developers, and its library of online purchasable games couldn't be bigger it's bigger than it's ever been before, So we don't really know where the Nintendo intends to go next, but for now, they just announced something called the Switch Lite, which is basically a smaller version of the Switch, more portable. Unfortunately, you can't detach the Joy-Cons on the side that the original Switch has. You have detachable controllers. This one isn't gonna have that, but it's more portable. So we'll see what they're gonna end up doing. But for now, I'm going to be enjoying playing Smash and racing with my friends on the Switch. I hope you guys enjoyed my podcast. Thank you for listening.